I unexpectedly transmigrated into a novel where both the male and female leads were strong characters with secret identities. I became the despised, wealthy but malicious supporting female character. This supporting character liked the second male lead and grew envious of the female lead, so she schemed against the female lead in every possible way. The female lead was vengeful and always sought revenge for any wrongs done to her, and the supporting character ultimately faced the consequences of her own actions. I had originally planned to stay away from the characters in the story to avoid getting caught up in the plot. However, I had forgotten that Lin Yang, the second male lead, was the supporting character's neighbor. When I looked up, I met his bright eyes. "My name is Lin Yang, what's yours?" And just like that, the plot started unexpectedly. I had transmigrated, a very cliché beginning to a story, but instead of becoming the beloved female lead, I ended up as the villainess despised by everyone in the novel. The second male lead liked the female lead, and the villainess liked the second male lead. As a result, the villainess did many bad things to harm the female lead, but the female lead wasn't some naive, sweet girl who would take things lying down. She always retaliated. The outcome was predictable. The female lead was cherished by all, while the villainess was scorned by everyone. I lay on the bed in a big X shape, my 11 or 12-year-old body staring blankly at the ceiling. The villainess came from a wealthy family, and the pampering by her parents was one of the reasons for her mild princess syndrome. I silently made a decision. I would stay as far away from the main characters of the novel as possible and begin a laid-back, carefree life as a rich second generation. "Tao Tao, a new family just moved in next door. Could you go and bring them some things? Mom can't leave right now." I originally thought the villainess's parents doting meant they wouldn't let her lift a finger, but it seemed that wasn't the case. Okay, I walked out of my room, went downstairs, picked up a plate of apples from the coffee table, and knocked on the door of the new neighbors. Although I really liked the second male lead in the novel, I couldn't afford to offend the other characters. Better not to get involved. I was lost in thought, wandering aimlessly in my mind. Click, the door in front of me opened. "Hello, I'm your neighbor from across the..." My words got stuck in my throat. The person in front of me had a fresh and handsome face with a hint of youthful innocence that left me momentarily dazed. He was wearing a light blue shirt, with sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes, almost exactly as I had imagined the second male lead, Lin Yang. My greeting was cut off, but he quickly caught on. His slightly drooping eyes curved up as he smiled and said, "Good morning. We'll be neighbors from now on." I remembered, the second male lead, Lin Yang, had been neighbors with the villainess for 4 years. From the start of middle school until the second year of high school, a whole 4 years. Could it be that he was, as if to confirm my suspicions, he continued his sentence clearly, "My name is Lin Yang. What's yours?" The boy's voice was clear, but when he spoke that name, the one I'd read 100 times, so familiar it was ingrained in me, I felt a chill run down my spine. The tragic and absurd life of the villainess had begun the moment she met Lin Yang. "My name is Tao. Lin Yang and I both attended Yicheng Middle School." I tried to protest the arrangement of going to and from school with him, but it was useless. Unlike the original villainess, I was particularly slow when it came to matters of affection and never showed much enthusiasm. That's why I had very few genuine friends in my original world, and anyone who tried to get close to me later was discouraged by my indifference. Lin Yang would be no different. Yicheng Middle School was not far from my home. I didn't like drawing attention by being driven to and from school, so I suggested walking instead. My mother, feeling relieved, agreed. I also abandoned the unrealistic idea of avoiding Lin Yang. Since there was no escaping it, I decided to face it head-on and go with the flow. In fact, my favorite character in the novel was the second male lead, Lin Yang, not just because of his deep infatuation with the female lead, but also because of his bright and cheerful personality, which was the kind of warmth I yearned for. Maybe he would be an exception. On the way to school, he seemed to have an endless stream of things to say. "Tao, which class are you in? I'll come find you to hang out. When's your birthday? What's your zodiac sign? Do you like sweets? Want some fruit candy?" The thoughts of a first-year middle school kid were simple and easy to guess. Though he was noisy, I didn't find it annoying. I even chatted with him intermittently until we reached the school gate. I was in class 5, and he was in class 6, right next door. Just like the character setting in the novel, Lin Yang was good at socializing. Not long after the new semester began, he had already become close with the boys in his class. During every break, The sounds of Lin Yang playing around with his friends could always be heard from the hallway, which was quite the opposite of me. Lin Yang was very strict about sticking to the arrangement between our two families. Not long after the dismissal bell rang, he would appear at the back door of my classroom, peering inside to find me, waiting for me to pack up so we could go home together. As the sky darkened and the street lights came on, I would look down and play with my own shadow, while he excitedly shared interesting stories beside me. If I heard something that piqued my interest, I would respond casually. Sometimes, when he described things in a funny or exaggerated way, I would let out a small laugh. The way home became a bit more entertaining because of him, and our relationship grew closer, gradually moving in the direction of becoming good friends. Relying on the advantage of having already gone through 9 years of compulsory education once, I managed to become a good student this time around. In the blink of an eye, 2 years passed by. Lin Yang and I entered our 3rd year of middle school, and life was so calm that it felt almost unreal. According to the plot of the story, both Lin Yang and I would get into Yicheng First High School. The male and female leads would transfer there in the first year of high school and meet each other. Lin Yang would fall in love with the female lead in that same year. So, I only had 1 year left of this harmonious relationship with him. What are you thinking about so deeply? Lin Yang waved his hand in front of my eyes. I snapped out of my thoughts and forced a smile. Oh, nothing, let's go. Just then, a few of Lin Yang's buddies walked by and jokingly shouted, "Hey, picking up your girlfriend after school again?" Lin Yang persistently tried to explain, "She's not my girl. Sister-in-law looks so pretty today." "Hey, you're really blunt with your words. Alright, see you later, Lin Yang." The boy who had flattered me was dragged away. I didn't say anything. I was already used to these kinds of teasing remarks, which had started in the 2nd year of middle school and continued into the 3rd. I didn't really mind it. Instead, I was more concerned about the thin-skinned Lin Yang feeling embarrassed, so I took the initiative to steer away from the topic. "Let's go." "Okay." He was only quiet for a moment before he returned to his usual self, chatting with me as we walked. I wasn't deluded enough to expect Lin Yang to develop any special feelings for me. The author had decreed that he liked the female lead, so he was destined not to fall for any other girl, myself included. I sat cross-legged on the soft carpet beside my bed, feeling a bit lost. In the novel, Ying Tao was just a cannon fodder supporting character, with very little written about her. So much so that when I first saw Ying Tao's face, I was a bit shocked. She was beautiful, not in that overly standardized internet celebrity way. Her eyebrows and eyes were soft and delicate, like the misty fog during a light rain in Jiangnan, or the thin smoke curling up into the air. There was even a bit of resemblance to my own appearance. Add to that the aura of a wealthy family's daughter, and her indifferent gaze took on a hint of disdain. As for me, my personality was bland and indifferent, and I had a face that seemed to say, "Stay away from me." It suddenly made sense why some people didn't like me. Back to the point, the author never mentioned anything about Ying Tao's personal romantic storyline, how she met Lin Yang, why she liked him, or when she fell for him. None of it was explained. It seemed as though she existed solely for the male and female leads. She didn't even have a complete life story of her own, just large blank spaces. Her only purpose was to enhance the relationship between the leads. This also meant I had no idea what might happen before the male and female leads appeared on the scene. However, I didn't think Ying Tao would simply like Lin Yang because he walked her to and from school. Ying Tao lived a life of luxury. What kind of flattery hadn't she heard? I was more inclined to think that something like a hero saves the damsel in distress scenario might have played out, an easy way to capture the heart of a teenage girl. Of course, I couldn't rule out the possibility that Ying Tao simply had a weakness for handsome boys. Bang! The harsh sound of porcelain shattering came from downstairs. I opened my bedroom door and walked down the stairs. With each step, the argument between a man and a woman grew louder in my ears. When I reached the living room, the villainess's parents were locked in a standoff, both showing a determined stance, unwilling to back down. I had rarely seen them argue, let alone with an atmosphere so frigid. Mother was the first to notice me standing to the side. She tried to force a smile and said, "Tao Tao, why did you come out? Are we being too noisy?" The version of me who was about to enter my 3rd year of high school in the original world quickly understood. I pretended to be clueless and said I was going out for a while. Naturally, they were too preoccupied to bother with me and just told me to be careful. The moment I closed the door, the argument inside grew louder. If I were the real Ying Tao, I could cry and throw a tantrum to defuse the situation, but I couldn't do that. Yet, having become numb to such scenes in the original world, I didn't know why my eyes and nose were gradually stinging. The liquid I called cowardice welled up in my eyes uncontrollably. It must have been the original character's emotions affecting me. I messily wiped away the tears that blurred my vision with the pads of my fingers, burying my face in the crook of my arm, trying to muffle my sobs, which soon turned into faint whimpers. Images began to surface in my mind. I could hear a woman's screams, a man's curses, and a girl's cries. Amid my own choking sobs, I came to a realization: the one crying wasn't Im Tao, it was me, the me who was recalling those nightmarish memories from the past. I had cried enough. Just as I was about to stand up, the door to Lin Yang's house unexpectedly opened. I looked up abruptly and met his concerned gaze. Today, he was wearing a loose, plain white t-shirt. When he saw me, the worry in his eyes was replaced by surprise. "Tao Zi1, you." Then, in a swift change of tone, he grinned and extended his hand toward me. "Did you come to find me? Come on, I'll take you out to have some fun." The moment he said this, my heart couldn't help but skip a beat. I thought, maybe this was the moment when Im Tao fell for Lin Yang. It was as if a ray of light had shone through. I hesitated for a moment, then began to reach out my hand, but before I could, he grabbed it directly and pulled me along as we jogged out of the building. "Where are we going?" I asked. Lin Yang didn't turn back. His sleeves fluttered in the wind, like a white dove flapping its wings, ready to take flight. His voice came from above, "To a place that makes someone happy." His hand was warm and strong, as if it could pull me out of all my restraints. "I don't even know of a place that could make me happy." The wind carried his bright laughter to my ears, with a hint of pride. "Do you know who I am? I am Lin Yang. Trust me, satisfaction guaranteed." I was amused by his confident yet deliberately playful tone. Two teenagers ran hand in hand along a small path lined with golden rain trees, trampling over the scattered patches of light that filtered through the leaves. As I stared at his somewhat slender back, a wave of inexplicable sadness washed over me. This might be one of the few moments of closeness between us. In a year, the person destined for him would appear. "Lin Yang," I called out to him. He immediately stopped in his tracks. "Let's not go." He turned around and asked me, puzzled, "Why?" I shook my head and bit my lip. "I'm not sad anymore." I tilted my head toward a flower shop and, unreasonably, ordered, "Buy me a bouquet of balloon flowers." "All right." He patted the back of my head and walked into the flower shop. Not long after, he emerged from the wisteria-covered entrance, holding a bouquet of balloon flowers. The light purple wisteria vines made his eyes and brows look even more pure, like a pool of clear water rippling with scattered leaves. What a waste of my perfect cheer-up-the-crybaby plan, getting it done with just a few flowers, Lin Yang remarked, hands casually tucked into his pockets. "I'm not a crybaby." "Yes, you are." "No, I'm not." Lin Yang walked me back home at a slow, relaxed pace, with my hands clasped behind my back. I chatted with him, while the streetlights came on, stretching our shadows out longer and longer. A year passed quickly. During the summer break, I was very happy spending time with Lin Yang. I was like a greedy gambler, wishing to possess every minute and second of his time. But reason held me back, and I blamed these thoughts on the original character's uncontrollable feelings for Lin Yang. Still, I couldn't blame her. It was Lin Yang who was too wonderful. If I didn't know that he would eventually give his heart to someone else, I might have liked him too. Who wouldn't like the sun? Both Lin Yang and I got into the top class at Yicheng First High School. When he found out we were in the same class, he was over the moon, vividly imagining what our life sitting next to each other would be like. I teased him, saying he was like a long-lost child who had finally found his family. He scratched his head and calmed down, but the stars in his eyes couldn't be hidden. I chuckled, pretending to ponder deeply before clearing my throat and saying, "Better get up early tomorrow, or the seats by the window will all be taken." "Yes, ma'am," he replied with a salute. How childish. Let's get going already. Walking home with Lin Yang always required a bit of courage and a thick skin. The next day, I managed to get up early for once. As soon as I stepped out of the house, I saw Lin Yang leaning against the doorframe, casting a resentful glance my way. "If we don't get a seat, all right, it's my fault." "Now hurry up," I said, unceremoniously tugging at the corner of his shirt as we headed downstairs. We ran out of the neighborhood, and Lin Yang grabbed the collar of my shirt, guiding me to where the bicycles were parked. He straddled the seat, rang the bike bell, and smiled at me with a proud arch of his brows. "See? I had the foresight to get a bike ready in advance. I stared at the familiar scene in front of me, momentarily dazed. It wasn't until Lin Yang urged me in confusion that I snapped out of it and got on the back seat. Lin Yang rang the bell again and started pedaling. Off we go. By the way, Tao Zi, have you gained weight? Screw you. I punched him, and he burst into hearty laughter. He laughed with reckless abandon, his wind-blown jacket flapping in the air like the wings of a soaring bird. Though my view was blocked, I could imagine the way he looked when he laughed, bright and radiant, like the sun. It was the best kind of smile a 16 or 17-year-old boy could have, carefree, fearless, and unrestrained. As for me, my youthful enthusiasm had long been worn down by life, ground into dust and scattered into some unnoticed corner. Lin Yang rode quickly, so fast it felt like we might create sparks from the friction with the air. It was fortunate that the back seat had a backrest to hold on to, so I didn't have to clutch his clothes or wrap my arms around him. This was where we should draw the line in our relationship. No need to go any further. We managed to be among the early arrivals, just as we had hoped. I chose a seat by the window in the third to last row, which surprised Lin Yang. He thought I would pick the very last row. After all, in middle school, I always sat in the last row, never really blending in. I just smiled and said nothing. The last row would be where the male and female leads would sit, where they would meet, get to know each other, and have an intense love story, just like all the protagonists in dramas. I started recalling the plot of the novel. The female lead, Yuyin, was originally the pampered daughter of the wealthy Yu family. However, after the family fell into decline, she had to stay with her aunt's family. Thanks to her excellent academic performance, she managed to transfer to Yicheng First High School. The male lead, Liang Rao, had met Yuyin a few times in their childhood. When he found out that she was transferring to Yicheng First High School, he wasted no time in arranging his own transfer to the same school. Liang Rao used connections to transfer schools and didn't bother to introduce himself. He sat in the last row and immediately went to sleep, but it wasn't time for their appearance yet. The protagonists always make their entrance at the climax. As I sorted through the main plot points, I noticed that Lin Yang had been quiet for a while. When I turned my head, I saw him leaning closer toward me. I pushed his forehead away with my hand, annoyed. "What are you doing?" He blinked and asked curiously. "You have that balloon flower scent on you again. Do you like it that much?" Being confronted so directly made my face instantly flush. "Why are you asking?" "Kids shouldn't meddle in women's business." Lin Yang pouted and muttered, "Stingy, and calling yourself a woman, I can hear you." Lin Yang quickly apologized. "My bad." I drank the strawberry milk Lin Yang had prepared for me while working on my workbook exercises. The classroom was almost full, with just 2 main characters yet to make their entrance. In the meantime, I tried to greet a few middle school classmates who happened to end up in the same class. Among them was the boy who had previously called me pretty. He was quick to speak and once again called me sister-in-law. This time, before Lin Yang could say anything, I smiled and said, "Just friends." Then I looked at Lin Yang. I thought he wouldn't be awkward this time, but I seemed to catch a glimpse of disappointment in his eyes. I must have been mistaken. The back door was kicked open, and a laid-back boy with a single-shoulder backpack walked in. His bangs covered his eyebrows, but it was still easy to see that his facial features were striking and well-defined. He naturally took a seat in the last row. Ring, the bell for morning reading rang. That must be the male lead, Liang Rao. Liang Rao casually tossed his backpack into the desk, making quite a commotion that caused many people to turn and look at him. However, he seemed completely unaware and immediately laid his head down to sleep. This guy embodied arrogance to the fullest. As expected, people who knew each other began whispering among themselves, "Who is he? No idea, never seen him before, maybe he's from out of town? He's quite handsome." I glanced at him for a few seconds before losing interest. Lin Yang was also staring at him. In the original novel, Liang Rao often targeted Lin Yang out of jealousy, not wanting Lin Yang to have too much interaction with Liang Rao. I turned his head back toward his desk. "Focus on your book." Just as I was wondering why the homeroom teacher hadn't arrived yet, a friendly, balding middle-aged man walked into the classroom with a big smile on his face. Behind him followed an exceptionally beautiful girl. She had an extraordinary aura, and her long, slender legs under a pleated skirt caught the attention of several boys, their eyes lighting up. The homeroom teacher knocked on the podium, signaling for the class to be quiet. The girl stood to the side with her eyes lowered, her silky black hair draped over her shoulders, giving her an appearance of utmost docility. The homeroom teacher introduced himself first. His name was Lu Fu. Then he continued, "This student is a new transfer. Please introduce yourself." She nodded and stepped half a pace forward to the front of the podium. Her voice was soft and melodious. "Hello everyone, my name is Yuin." "Which Yuin is that?" a boy interrupted. Though this was the top class, there were still a few spoiled rich kids who had bought their way in. These pampered young masters and ladies tended to have a bit of a mean streak. Yuin smiled faintly and turned to write her name on the blackboard. She tossed the chalk back into the box casually. "Does that answer your question?" she asked, her expression tinged with arrogance. Perhaps they were stunned by her demeanor, but no one said a word. Seeing this, Yuin bowed and concluded her introduction. "I hope we can all get along well." Lin Yang leaned in close to my ear, his faint scent of citrus wafting over. "This Yuin is pretty interesting." I squeezed the corner of my milk carton, crumpling it slightly. I replied coolly with a simple, "Yeah." Lu Fu glanced around the classroom and then assigned Yuin to sit next to Liang Rao. Yuin stepped down from the podium and walked toward our side of the room. She had a pair of charming, fox-like eyes, resembling a vibrant and captivating hibiscus flower. When she reached her seat, she noticed that her new deskmate had mistakenly placed his bag inside her desk. Yuin frowned and, with a flick of her hand, shoved the bag back into his desk. "So cool. Wow, that new girl is so cool. I'm going to make friends with her after class." Lin Yang exclaimed. I gave him a helpless smile. "Focus on the lesson first." Lin Yang obediently closed his mouth and listened attentively. As soon as the bell rang, marking the end of the class, and I capped my pen, Lin Yang immediately dashed over to Yuin to talk to her. I couldn't quite describe what I was feeling inside. Was it sadness? Anger? Maybe it was regret. I could have stopped him. If I had grabbed his hand just now, would he and Yuin not have become friends? Would he not have fallen for her? Would he have avoided that heart-wrenching unrequited love? But I didn't dare. I didn't have the courage to try to change the course of the story. I couldn't bear the consequences of the butterfly effect that might follow. Someone like me had long lost the right to be impulsive, reckless, and daring. On the way home after school, he smiled cheerfully and, without realizing it, brought her up. "You know, Yuin kind of reminds me of you." I paused in my steps. "In what way?" Her demeanor. "You both look like European noble ladies." "I'll take that as a compliment." Lin Yang kicked a small stone along the road and then shifted his tone. "But it's not quite the same. Even though you always have a stern face, Tao Zi, you've got a really soft heart. People say Yuin is beautiful, but she's too arrogant. Besides, you're much prettier than she is." He said this, but his eyes told a different story. I lowered my gaze and teased him in a joking tone. "Smooth talker. I'm sure in front of Yuin, you'd say she's the prettier one, right?" Lin Yang clutched his chest, pretending to be heartbroken. "So this is how you see me?" "I'm hurt." I gave his shin a light kick. "Cut it out." But inside, I couldn't help but think more and more. What about me in your eyes? Am I a neighbor or a friend? There were only a few pedestrians on the street. Lin Yang and I bantered as we walked, one behind the other. Under the moonlight, the wisteria flowers planted outside the flower shop looked cold and quiet. Lin Yang and Yuin were growing closer. He brought her strawberry yogurt, and when he found out she didn't like it, he immediately switched to plain milk. He also gave her snacks, brought her an umbrella. Gradually, Yuin and I received equal treatment. I didn't resort to bullying Yuin to get Lin Yang's attention. I wasn't that spoiled rich girl. Besides, I knew that, one day, Yu Yin's place in his heart would surpass mine. It was only a matter of time. Why should I humiliate myself? One day, Mr. Lu suggested that we bring a few potted plants from home to beautify the school environment. I held the few cherished balloon flowers in my arms as I walked along the softly sunlit path in the morning. Lin Yang caught up with me and, with a tone full of grievance, immediately demanded, "Why haven't you been waiting for me lately?" I forgot. "You talk about Yuin every day, and I'm tired of hearing it." "Do I look like an idiot to you?" I couldn't help but laugh. "A little bit." Lin Yang pretended to be angry, but after a few words from me, he was coaxed back to good spirits. Then he asked, "Aren't these the balloon flowers you like the most? You're really bringing them to school? Aren't you afraid someone will pluck them?" "If someone dares to, I'll check the surveillance and beat them up," I replied calmly. "Tao Zi, it's kind of scary when you say that with a straight face." I politely gave him a smile. "Thanks for the compliment." I carefully placed the balloon flowers on a small platform in the hallway. Lin Yang ran over and stuck a small label on the flower pot. His handwriting was always bold and free. And yet, the way he wrote in Tao in neat strokes actually looked a bit cute. I took great care of the balloon flowers, and their pleasant fragrance could be smelled from far away. Whenever he had nothing to do, Lin Yang would help me water them. But as soon as Yuin showed up, he would eagerly run after her like a complete scoundrel. However, things don't always go as planned. While class was in session, raindrops began to frequently tap against the glass windows. It was just a prelude. Before long, a torrential downpour started, fierce and relentless. Raindrops crashed against the windows one after another, while branches flailed wildly in the rain, tossed around by the raging wind. The rain came so suddenly, as if it intended to overwhelm everything in one sweeping blow. I couldn't help but worry about my delicate balloon flowers, my brows furrowing in concern. Noticing my anxiety, Lin Yang tried to calm me down. Don't worry too much. It's probably just a sun shower. It'll stop soon. Look over there. I followed his finger and saw a patch of sunlight peeking through the clouds on the horizon. My expression softened a bit, and I thanked him quietly. As Lin Yang had said, before the long physics class even ended, the sky began to brighten, the sound of rain ceased, and the sun hurriedly came out. The physics teacher dragged on the lesson for an extra 2 minutes. As soon as he left, Lin Yang shot out of the classroom like an arrow released from a bowstring. I heard that a rainbow often appears after a sun shower. I overheard 2 girls in the front row chatting. A rainbow? Just then, Lin Yang's voice came from the back door. Tao Zi. There's a rainbow. I looked in the direction of his voice and witnessed a scene that would remain etched in my memory for a long time. The wall of the classroom facing the hallway was lined with large windows offering a wide view. In the sky, the white clouds looked as soft and pure as cotton, resting against the distant indigo mountains and the nearby school buildings. A faint, colorful arc hung between 2 white clouds, hazy and delicate, like a piece of gossamer lost by a celestial maiden. Lin Yang stood at the back door, his tousled hair slightly sticking up at his forehead. He was holding my balloon flowers in his hands, his eyes filled with an excited smile as he looked at me, his figure edged with a thin layer of golden sunlight. The bright color of the balloon flowers paled in comparison to the brilliance in his eyes. As it turned out, even if I didn't provoke the female lead, there would always be someone else who would. Although Yi Cheng's public safety had improved significantly compared to before, there were still some troublemakers lurking around. Next to Yi Cheng First High School was a vocational school, and some of the students from that school, along with local thugs, would hide in the less traveled alleys to rob those who were walking alone. This was the main reason why my mother suggested that Lin Yang and I walk to and from school together. Yuin had caught the attention of a few delinquent girls from our grade, who ambushed her on her way home, warning her to stay away from Liang Rao. Yuin took an unconventional approach and asked, "Are you Liang Rao's girlfriend?" The lead girl, thinking Yuin was mocking her, snapped back, "None of your business." "Well, if you're not Liang Rao's girlfriend, what right do you have to tell me to stay away from him?" Yuin raised an eyebrow. "Is it because you like him?" "Whether you like him or not has nothing to do with me." The girl became furious out of embarrassment and raised her hand to slap Yuin. Liang Rao arrived just in time, grabbing the girl's wrist and pulling Yuin behind him to shield her. A classic damsel in distress moment. The next day, when Lin Yang found out, he immediately ran over to Yuin and checked her from head to toe, only relaxing after he made sure she was fine. Yuin responded nonchalantly, "I'm fine, Liang Rao helped me, so there's no need to worry, that won't do." "Liang Rao isn't here today, what if you run into them again?" Lin Yang eagerly volunteered, his voice rising with excitement, "I'll walk you home tonight." I wasn't far from them, so every word slipped clearly into my ears. After Lin Yang blurted out that statement, the 2 of them fell into silence. I guessed that they must have simultaneously looked over at me at that moment. I pretended not to hear and continued writing on my scrap paper. I knew that Liang Rao wouldn't be around today, and I knew that Lin Yang would end up walking Yuin home. But sometimes, I still naively wished to hold on to a tiny bit of hope for things that were never going to happen, even though I already had the answer in my heart. Hearing it with my own ears still left me in a daze for a long time. He spoke without any hesitation, with complete conviction. There wasn't the slightest hint of doubt because of me. What was he thinking when he looked at me then? It doesn't matter anymore, I thought. The sun had set, and the sky was cloaked in darkness. Lin Yang and I walked side by side, each with our own thoughts. He kept his focus on Yuin, who was walking alone ahead of us, occasionally glancing at me, as if wanting to say something but hesitating. I ignored his intense gaze, knowing Lin Yang He wouldn't be able to hold it in for long. Finally, as we were almost at the school gate, Lin Yang awkwardly spoke up, Taozi. Yes, I have something to do today. Could you go home by yourself? He asked tentatively. Okay. Before I could even ask, he blurted everything out like pouring beans from a jar. It's nothing serious, really. You know, Yuen got harassed yesterday, right? There's a chance they might cause her trouble again today, so I'm going to walk her home. It's not safe for a girl to be alone. Lin Yang assumed Yuen had been targeted by the thugs from the vocational school nearby, but he forgot that the vocational school was on the street where my house was, and Yuyen's home was in the completely opposite direction. He forgot that I was also a girl and would be just as helpless against tall, strong men. Looking into Lin Yang's eyes, my memory suddenly flashed back to the past. Back then, before Yuen had appeared, I could vaguely see a reflection of myself in his eyes. Now, his eyes were filled entirely with Yuen. How could a person change so quickly? I heard myself speak, my voice cold and distant, like the ice of a cold moon, only I knew how much grievance was mixed within. What about me? Lin Yang was stunned, not expecting me to ask that. I stopped in my tracks, standing at the crossroads, staring directly at him, like a lost traveler wandering in a desert, desperate to find a scarce water source. I asked, what makes you think I'm automatically safe walking home alone? I had never interfered in his interactions with Yuen. It was pointless. He would inevitably fall for Yuen, and only Yuen. I didn't want to be the foolish clown. He remained silent for a while, and sometimes silence is an answer in itself. I understood in my heart, she's getting far ahead, you'd better go catch up, I said, then turned and walked down the path leading home. Within seconds, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me, growing more and more distant as they ran away. I let out a long breath, thinking, this might be the end of our relationship. I walked alone for a while, my eyelid twitching constantly. A sense of foreboding crept up inside me. Could I actually run into some thugs? Just as I was about to call my family, 2 thugs with cigarettes dangling from their mouths emerged from a corner alley and spotted me. One of them whistled at me, a dangerous signal, but there was no way for me to escape now. I tried to stay calm and quickly pressed the lock button on my phone 5 times, triggering an automatic call to 110. They stopped in front of me, and I asked, are you here to rob me? If I give you money, will you let me go? The 2 thugs exchanged a glance and burst into laughter, eyeing me maliciously. That's usually the case, but one of them, a blonde guy, lifted my chin, his lecherous eyes making me feel sick. You are such a pretty girl, how about you play with us for a while? I frowned, my face clearly showing my resistance. I tightly gripped the pepper spray hidden in my sleeve, waiting for the right moment to escape. Just as I slapped away the blonde's filthy hand, a figure suddenly darted out from the alley behind them, landing a punch squarely on the blonde's face. I immediately took out my pepper spray and blindly sprayed at another thug with my eyes closed. This was followed by the muffled groans of 2 thugs in pain. As I was about to open my eyes, the person who had come to my rescue seemed to have some mind-reading ability. He quickly covered my eyes and said hoarsely, don't look. I froze. Why did that voice sound so much like Lin Yang's? I blinked, my eyelashes brushing against his palm. Lin Yang? No, that confirmed it, it was him. Amidst my surprise, an inexplicable and somewhat shameful joy sprouted within me. I pulled his hand down and met his gaze. The hostility in Lin Yang's eyes hadn't yet faded, and the thugs lay unconscious at his feet. Lin Yang avoided looking at me directly, his eyes darting around like a child caught doing something wrong by his mother. I felt a bit disoriented, but I actually found this side of him a little cute. Lin Yang, thank you. He turned to look at me, his eyes widening in disbelief. You're not mad at me anymore. Looking into his bright eyes, my nose suddenly tingled, and I felt an urge to cry. When did I start becoming so emotional? Just as I opened my mouth to say something, Lin Yang's pupils suddenly shrank. He grabbed my hand and bolted in the direction of home. At the same time, I heard the wail of police sirens. This residential area was very quiet, with few pedestrians and cars. The sound of our footsteps echoed between the buildings, breaking the silence. What filled my ears was not just the soft whisper of the cool wind, but also the suppressed sobs of a coward. I just wanted to run faster with him, faster and faster, fast enough to outrun time, cross dimensions, and escape this world inside a book, to a place where there were no female leads or villainesses. Lin Yang heard my sobbing. He stopped in his tracks and turned back to look at me. I immediately turned my head to the side, hiding my face. Don't look, I look ugly. To my surprise, Lin Yang gently took hold of the hand I was using to cover my face, his touch unbelievably soft. I shuddered slightly and instinctively looked up at him. Under the warm yellow light filtering through the leaves, he smiled tenderly. "You're not ugly, you're beautiful. Some people tend to cry even more when they're comforted. I am not one of them." But when I met Lin Yang's tender gaze, so soft it left me dazed, I crumbled once more, crying uncontrollably. Lin Yang was so flustered that he didn't know what to do. "Why are you crying?" Even harder. Yeah, why was I crying? Because I knew I could no longer deceive myself. I had fallen for Lin Yang a long time ago. Once you step into the mire, no matter how much you struggle, it's useless, you only sink deeper and deeper. He clumsily patted my back, apologizing with guilt in his voice. "I'm sorry, it's my fault, I shouldn't have left you alone, and I shouldn't have." "Can't walk anymore, carry me," I interrupted him, my eyes dry and uncomfortable, so I squinted slightly and gave Lin Yang a command. He froze for a second before realizing what I meant. His face lit up with a big smile. "As you wish." I rarely acted so childishly, but he was Lin Yang, and the Yin Tao who felt her heart flutter, got nervous, felt jealous, and was frustrated. That was always me. Lying on Lin Yang's back, I hesitated for a while, but couldn't suppress my curiosity any longer. "Weren't you supposed to be with Yuan? How did you suddenly appear in front of me?" Lin Yang's steps were steady, and I felt only the slightest of bounces. He answered me without even pausing for breath. "Actually, not long after walking her home, I saw the police investigating over there, so I felt relieved and ran back. I had already seen you from a distance. When I noticed you running into trouble with those thugs, I took a shortcut through the alley and gave them a beating." He was silent for a moment, then asked abruptly, "Scary, right?" It sounded more like a statement than a question. "Actually, hey, what are you doing?" Before he could finish, I ruffled his fluffy hair. "Not scary at all, you were really cool, really, super cool." Lin Yang's mood lifted immediately. "I think so too." I rested my chin on his shoulder and snickered. "Shameless." I turned my head to watch the swaying trees across the street, and suddenly a thought crossed my mind. According to the original plot, tonight was supposed to be the night Lin Yang walked Yuan home, which was the turning point for him to realize his feelings for her. But since Lin Yang had come to rescue me instead, perhaps he hadn't yet figured out his feelings for Yuan. "Xiao Yang, what do you feel for Yuan?" Lin Yang answered honestly. "What do I feel? I guess I like her. What else could it be?" I felt like a bucket of cold water had been poured over me from head to toe, leaving me completely chilled. I didn't even register the rest of what he was saying, something about head, heart, and hurt. The plot of the novel wouldn't change because of me. I was nothing more than a tiny, insignificant mayfly in this story. Lin Yang, the second male lead, would always fall in love with the female lead, Yuan. In this youthful romance novel, I was entirely dispensable. "Tao Zi, look." I looked up. It was the flower shop. It was still draped in large clusters of wisteria flowers. A wind chime hung by the window, its pendant made of delicate wisteria blooms strung together. I forced myself to act natural and brought up a topic to chat about. "Do you know the meaning of wisteria flowers?" The emotional turmoil I had just gone through was something only I could swallow and digest on my own. Lin Yang couldn't see my face and was completely unaware. He followed along and asked, "What is it?" "Deep longing and love." Saying this felt a bit cheesy, but I knew Lin Yang wouldn't mock my cliché. "What about balloon flowers?" I deliberately kept it a secret and said, "I'll tell you later." No cheating by looking it up online. "When is later?" I lowered my eyes, my voice softening, as if I were speaking to him or just talking to myself. "Very soon." That night, we talked about everything, from the stars and the sea to the streets and alleyways. Even the usually oblivious Lin Yang sensed something was off. "Tao Zi, you've been talking more than usual today. What's wrong?" The thought of saying goodbye felt like a tightening rope around my throat, choking me into silence. My lips trembled slightly, as if I were drunk on the bright moonlight. I murmured his name softly. "Lin Yang." I rested my forehead against his back, burying my face in his shirt. My words were muffled. "I like you." "What did you say?" He didn't hear me clearly. My hands were clasped together in front of his chest, leaning close to his ear. I repeated. I said, "It's going to rain tomorrow." "You're bluffing. Look, the sky is completely clear." Just as he had said, tonight the night sky was clear and cloudless, and the usually faint starlight shone much brighter. I smiled faintly. Believe it or not, I knew I shouldn't confess to him, but I couldn't let it go. We were so close, with me pressed against his solid back. If I just lowered my head, I could see his fluttering eyelashes, I could kiss his face. Yet, I had never felt so far away from him. I was on one side of the river, he was on the other, he was hidden in the thick mist, and I couldn't see him clearly. Late at night, I saw Lin Yang. He stood in a field of balloon flowers, his brows curved in a gentle smile as he said he liked me. I abruptly opened my eyes, it was a dream. I absent-mindedly fiddled with the balloon flower Lin Yang had given me. Tao Tao, are you all packed? We need to go now. I placed the balloon flower inside the white mailbox outside the door. At first, it was just a whimsical idea to decorate it a bit. I never thought it would actually come in handy. Hearing my mother's urging from downstairs, I responded loudly, coming. I carried my suitcase downstairs, stuffed it into the trunk, quickly got in the car, and shut the door. Let's go, my mother asked. Are you really not going to tell Lin Yang? My smile froze instantly, and I shook my head. No need, she sighed, not pressing me further, and instructed the driver to start the car. The third female lead, Yim Tao, had no more scenes after the second year of high school. To keep Yuan from being affected, Liang Rao had found a way to make Yim Tao's family move away. From this point on, Yim Tao's future was a blank sheet of paper to me as well. I leaned against the car window, watching the scenery outside flash by like a series of frames from a film. A few minutes later, a fine drizzle began to fall from the sky. Shortly after, the rain grew heavier, pouring down with a loud, incessant roar. It was as if my words had been prophetic. This sudden downpour marked the end of my absurd youth. As I stared at the unfamiliar surroundings outside the car, I thought to myself, I should be free now. Yim Tao didn't come to class today. Yim Tao's mother said she had something to attend to, but Yim Tao hadn't told him. She must have forgotten, Lin Yang thought. She was always like that. Around noon, it started to rain. Lin Yang thought of Yim Tao. What she had said actually came true. When he went to the cafeteria at noon, he noticed balloon flower petals scattered on the hallway floor, beaten down by the rain. A sense of unease crept over him. Yim Tao would be sad when she saw that tomorrow. During the lunch break, Lin Yang glanced at the empty seat next to him, feeling a hollow emptiness inside. He stared out the window, watching the leaves bow under the weight of the raindrops, and slowly drifted off to sleep. With Yim Tao absent, Lin Yang felt inexplicably restless and distracted. He didn't even notice when Yuan called out to him, even though a voice in his mind often whispered, "You should like Yuan." His heart would ache every time Yuan's presence caused him to neglect Yim Tao. Whenever he thought of Yuan, another pair of calm, misty eyes would float into his mind, those of Yim Tao. He thought he liked Yuan, but only when Yim Tao was no longer around did he slowly realize that the person who had always occupied his subconscious was Yim Tao. It had never changed. After enduring the long evening self-study session, Lin Yang, feeling a sudden clarity, ran joyfully down the street, his eyes seeing everything in a new light. But when he arrived at Yim Tao's house, what awaited him was a tightly closed iron gate. He knocked and called out, "Yim Tao," but there was no response. The only thing left was the lingering scent of balloon flowers in the air, a faint trace of her presence. It was then that he noticed a balloon flower and a card placed quietly in the mailbox nearby. Lin Yang took out the card, and the handwriting on it was the one he was most familiar with, delicate and restrained, with a soft touch, just like its owner. There was no signature, only a simple line, the meaning of balloon flowers, unwavering love, even if hopeless.